Hello everyone and welcome to Wormwood Tales. Relax and enjoy the story for sleep video. Before you drift off, I thought it would be a fun idea if everyone can leave a comment to let me know where you are listening from in the world. Let's begin. Ever since I first saw breathtaking photographs of Yosemite National Park, I had been captivated by the idea of experiencing its beauty at night. The vast expanse of the stars against the backdrop of towering granite cliffs stirred something deep within me, and I dreamed of standing beneath that celestial canopy with my camera, capturing a moment that felt truly magical. I imagined the crisp mountain air filling my lungs, the sound of silence wrapping around me like a warm blanket as I clicked away at my shutter, hoping to capture the Milky Way in all its glory. My heart raced at the thought of it. After months of planning and gathering my gear, I finally decided to take the plunge. I loaded up my car with my camera equipment, a sturdy tripod, and a sleeping bag, ready to embrace the adventure that awaited me. As I drove through winding roads, the anticipation swelled within me, each mile bringing me closer to my destination. I envisioned myself perched on a quiet hill, far from the glow of the city, where I could truly immerse myself in the beauty of the night. When I arrived at the park, I searched for the perfect campsite, an isolated spot that felt like my own little sanctuary. After what felt like an eternity, I finally found a secluded area, nestled among the trees and far away from any trails or other campers. I set up my tent, feeling the thrill of solitude wash over me. It was just me and the wilderness, and I couldn't wait to see the stars emerge as dusk fell. Little did I know, the quiet of the night would soon be shattered by an encounter that would change everything. The day passed quietly, enveloped in a serene stillness that made me feel as if I were the only person in the world. I hiked along the winding trails of Yosemite, the scent of pine trees mingling with the crisp mountain air. Each step brought me deeper into the heart of nature, where the towering cliffs and majestic waterfalls were nothing short of breathtaking. I stopped frequently to capture the beauty around me, adjusting my camera settings to seize the perfect shot of the vibrant wildflowers swaying gently in the breeze or the way the sunlight danced across the surface of the crystal clear streams. As I wandered further from the campsite, I scouted for an ideal location to set up for the night. I wanted a spot that offered an unobstructed view of the sky, a place where the stars would emerge like diamonds on velvet, free from the glow of any artificial lights. The thrill of anticipation pulsed within me as I envisioned the breathtaking photographs I hoped to capture. I noted a few promising areas, each with its unique charm: a grassy knoll overlooking a tranquil lake, a rocky outcrop that provided a sweeping vista of the valley below. As the sun began its descent, casting a warm golden hue over the landscape, I returned to camp, my mind racing with possibilities. The plan was to stay up late, armed with my camera and a thermos of hot coffee, waiting for the sky to darken enough to unveil the celestial wonder I had longed to see. I knew the clouds might spoil my plans, and I felt a slight twinge of worry as I glanced up at the sky, watching as wisps of white began to gather. The fading light of day painted the clouds in soft pastels, but I hoped they would dissipate, giving way to the clear, star-filled night I craved. With each passing moment, my excitement grew, but so did a sense of unease that prickled at the back of my mind. The tranquil beauty of the day felt like a fragile illusion, and as the shadows stretched longer across the ground, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me, lurking just beyond the edges of my sight. I shrugged it off, attributing it to the isolation of the wilderness, but deep down, I felt an inexplicable tension in the air, as if the forest itself held its breath, waiting for the night to unfold. When dusk finally fell, the vibrant colors of the sunset faded into deeper shades of purple and blue, and a cool breeze swept through the camp, invigorating my senses. I made my way back, feeling the excitement build in my chest, the promise of the night ahead lingering in the air. I set about brewing a pot of coffee over the small camp stove, the rich aroma mingling with the crisp, earthy scents of the forest around me. Sipping the warm beverage, I felt the caffeine coursing through me, sharpening my focus and bolstering my anticipation for the celestial display I had come to capture. As the last light of day slipped beneath the horizon, I gathered my gear, my camera, lenses, and sturdy tripod before hoisting the lantern in my other hand. The world around me plunged into darkness, the familiar sounds of the forest taking over, the rustling leaves, the distant call of an owl, and the soft crunch of twigs beneath my boots as I made my way toward the open area I had scouted earlier. Reaching the clearing, I stopped to take it all in. The night sky was breathtakingly clear, adorned with countless stars twinkling like diamonds scattered across a velvet backdrop. I could hardly believe my luck. It was a perfect night. I set up my tripod with practiced ease, each movement a ritual I had honed over years of photography. I carefully checked my camera settings, adjusting the exposure and focus to capture the celestial beauty above me. With each test shot I took, I felt more connected to the moment, as if I were tapping into something primal and eternal. For what felt like an eternity, I adjusted angles and experimented with compositions, each click of the shutter echoing in the stillness of the night. I was in my element, fully immersed in this otherworldly experience, feeling as if I had been transported to another realm where time held no meaning. The crisp night air filled my lungs, invigorating me as I moved around the clearing, chasing the perfect shot. Suddenly, as I settled into a rhythm, I caught a fleeting glimpse of something out of the corner of my eye. At first, I dismissed it as a trick of the light, a tree casting a strange shadow or a rustle of the branches in the breeze. But then I noticed it was moving, just barely. My heart began to race as I turned my head slowly, instinctively holding my breath. There, just outside the reach of my lantern's warm glow, stood a figure, a man, perfectly still, his eyes fixed on me. He was half hidden in the darkness, a mere silhouette against the night, yet the intensity of his gaze pierced through the shadows. He didn't say a word, didn't make a single move, but the palpable weight of his presence sent a chill racing down my spine. My first thought was that he was another hiker, perhaps drawn by the same allure of the stars that had brought me here. But why would anyone choose to wander out into the wilderness alone at this hour? A chill crept up my spine as I pondered this question. He stood perfectly still, his figure cloaked in shadow, and I couldn't shake the eerie feeling that something was off. He was too quiet, almost as if he had slipped into the scene from a different world, one where silence reigned and intruders were unwelcome. I raised my hand in a half wave, more out of politeness than anything else, trying to break the tension that hung thick in the air. My heart raced as I waited for him to respond, but he didn't move or make a sound. The only thing that broke the stillness was the faint rustling of leaves in the wind, and the unsettling feeling in my gut intensified. I forced myself to look down, fiddling with my camera, attempting to regain my focus and shake off the weird sensation that clung to me like a shadow. Yet, as I adjusted my settings and peered through the lens, I couldn't help but glance back. He was still there, unmoving, in the same spot, his dark eyes locked onto me with an intensity that sent shivers down my spine. It felt like he was waiting for something, or perhaps for me to make the next move. My breath caught in my throat as dread washed over me. What did he want? Did he even want anything at all? My imagination spiraled out of control, conjuring scenarios where the stranger was more than just a lost hiker. Was he a ghost, an omen, or something far worse? The night air thickened, and I could feel the weight of his gaze pressing down on me, as if he were somehow drawing nearer despite the distance that separated us. My heart raced as I realized that I was no longer just photographing the stars, I was now part of a scene where the darkness held secrets I was not prepared to uncover. After a couple of hours, I decided to head back to camp. The whole hike, I'd been fighting this crawling feeling like eyes were on me, just out of view. When I got back, my campsite looked different again. This time, I knew I hadn't moved anything, but now my stuff was rearranged again. My food bag was open, but nothing was missing. Everything was laid out in neat little rows, like someone had been inspecting it. Even my water bottle was unscrewed, left half open beside my sleeping bag. My flashlight, which I'd left in my tent, was now outside, balanced perfectly on top of my rolled-up jacket. I looked around, heart racing. There were no footprints, no signs of animals. Everything was perfectly still, as if whoever or whatever had done this was still nearby, watching. The thought made my skin crawl, and I scanned the trees, looking for anything unusual. And that's when I saw him. About 50 feet away, just past a cluster of pines, there was a man. He was standing perfectly still, just watching me. He didn't move or wave, just stood there, his face half hidden in the shadows of the trees. I couldn't make out any details, but I could see that he was smiling, not in a friendly way, but more appreciative, like he was proud of what he'd done. I shouted, "Hello. Can I help you?" My voice came out shaky, not as confident as I wanted it to sound. But he didn't respond. He just kept standing there, that strange, fixed smile on his face, nodding slowly. I took a step toward him, and that's when he finally moved. He turned, almost casually, and walked away, disappearing into the trees. I felt a shiver run through me, and I stood there for a while, just listening, trying to hear his footsteps, but there was nothing. He was gone, like he'd never been there at all. But that nod, that smile, it left a bad feeling in the pit of my stomach. I tried to brush it off, told myself he was just some strange hiker passing through. Maybe he hadn't meant to scare me. Maybe he was just curious. But I couldn't shake the feeling that he'd been watching me for a lot longer than I'd realized. That night, I didn't sleep well. I kept the flashlight on and listened for any sound, any rustle or snap of a twig. I'd decided to leave first thing in the morning, to cut my trip short and get out of there. But the next day, things were quiet. No sign of the man, no more rearranged items. I started to think maybe I'd imagined it, maybe it was all just some kind of weird fluke. But that night, I woke up again to find my tent open. Wider this time, the cool night air slipping inside. I scrambled to sit up, and the first thing I saw was a new arrangement of my stuff, laid out in even lines: my jacket, my food bag, my flashlight, everything lined up, neat and careful, like someone was making sure I'd notice. And just outside my tent, barely visible in the faint light, was another note. It was a scrap of paper, a piece torn from what looked like an old map, and written on it in careful block letters was a single word: tomorrow. I froze, staring at the note, my heart pounding. There was no question now. Someone was out there, someone who'd been watching me this whole time, waiting for something. That note felt like a warning, or a promise. Either way, it was enough for me. I didn't waste any time. I threw everything into my bag, barely stopping to make sure I had everything. I didn't even take down the tent. I just grabbed my essentials and left. I didn't care if I had to walk all night, I just needed to get away from that place, to put as much distance between myself and that man as possible. As I walked, every sound felt amplified, every rustle in the trees sending a jolt of fear through me. I kept looking back, half expecting to see him following, but the trail was empty. Still, I felt him out there, watching. That approving smile seared into my mind. It took me most of the night, but I finally made it back to a busier part of the park, close to the ranger station. I waited there until morning, not caring about the curious looks from the few other hikers who passed by. When I finally got back to my car, I felt like I could breathe again. I drove out of there as fast as I could, glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see that man's face staring back at me. I don't know what he wanted or why he did any of it. I went out to Glacier National Park by myself, something I'd done a few times before without any issues. It was usually peaceful, just me and the quiet. I picked a secluded spot to set up my tent, not too far from the river. There weren't a lot of other people around, which was fine by me. I liked the solitude, no distractions, just me and the trail. I set everything up, got the fire going, and started to settle in. That evening, I was cooking up some food when I realized a few things were missing from my bag. At first, I thought I just misplaced them, small stuff like my spare socks and one of my cents. I looked around, checked pockets, my tent, the ground, but they weren't anywhere. I convinced myself I probably just left them at home or packed them somewhere strange, even though I knew I wouldn't normally do that. I went on with the night, trying to enjoy the sounds of the river and the trees, but it felt different. It was like the woods were too quiet. I hear a snap or a shuffle in the bushes, but every time I turned there was. Felt that primal fear settle deep in my gut, the kind that tells you without words that you're in real danger. The shadows stretched long over the forest floor, and each snapping twig or rustling leaf seemed magnified 100 times. Dan's footsteps behind me never broke pace, echoing in that maddening rhythm, just close enough to let me know he was still there, but distant enough to make it feel like a twisted game of cat and mouse. I tried to keep calm, scanning the ground, the trees, anything that could anchor me back to safety, but it all looked the same in the fading light. At one point, I caught a glimpse of a faint trail off to the left, just a slender path winding through some dense brush. I didn't think. I just bolted, pushing through the branches, their claws tearing at my clothes, my skin. But as soon as I broke away, his footsteps quickened, to a steady, relentless rhythm, closing in. I didn't dare look back. I could feel his presence like a shadow, a malignant weight bearing down on me. I tore through the brush, gasping, the world narrowing to the pounding of my heart and the sound of my own frantic breath. Finally, I stumbled onto a clearing, empty, stark, almost surreal in the dim twilight. I paused, looking around, catching my breath, thinking maybe, just maybe, I'd lost him. But then he stepped into the clearing, slowly, his face cast in shadows, the white brim of his hat catching the last bit of light. He just stood there, as if savoring the silence between us, that awful, deafening silence where neither of us moved, both suspended in some nightmarish limbo. "You know," he finally said, voice soft but sharp as glass, "you should really pay attention to where you're going. Out here, people disappear." I swallowed, trying to steady my voice. "I'll find my way back," I said, forcing the words out, hoping they didn't sound as hollow to him as they did to me. He just smiled, a slow, humorless twist of his lips. "Well, if you think you can make it alone, go on." He stepped aside, just a bit, his gaze following me like a predator eyeing prey, letting me pass. But as I moved past him, every nerve on edge, I heard him mutter, almost too low to catch, "You'll be back." They always come back. I didn't stop to ask what he meant. I just kept moving, faster and faster, until I found a path, real or imagined, and followed it without looking back. Hours later, when I finally stumbled out of the forest onto a paved road, the sky was dark, stars scattered overhead. I never saw Dan again, but his voice still echoes in my mind, that promise hanging heavy in the night air, "They always come back." After a couple of hours, I decided to head back to camp. The whole hike, I'd been fighting this crawling feeling like eyes were on me, just out of view. When I got back, my campsite looked different again. This time, I knew I hadn't moved anything, but now my stuff was rearranged again. My food bag was open, but nothing was missing. Everything was laid out in neat little rows, like someone had been inspecting it. Even my water bottle was unscrewed, left half open beside my sleeping bag. My flashlight, which I'd left in my tent, was now outside, balanced perfectly on top of my rolled-up jacket. I looked around, heart racing. There were no footprints, no signs of animals. Everything was perfectly still, as if whoever or whatever had done this was still nearby, watching. The thought made my skin crawl, and I scanned the trees, looking for anything unusual. And that's when I saw him. About 50 feet away, just past a cluster of pines, there was a man. He was standing perfectly still, just watching me. He didn't move or wave, just stood there, his face half hidden in the shadows of the trees. I couldn't make out any details, but I could see that he was smiling, not in a friendly way, but more appreciative, like he was proud of what he'd done. I shouted, "Hello. Can I help you?" My voice came out shaky, not as confident as I wanted it to sound. But he didn't respond. He just kept standing there, that strange, fixed smile on his face, nodding slowly. I took a step toward him, and that's when he finally moved. He turned, almost casually, and walked away, disappearing into the trees. I felt a shiver run through me, and I stood there for a while, just listening, trying to hear his footsteps, but there was nothing. He was gone, like he'd never been there at all. But that nod, that smile, it left a bad feeling in the pit of my stomach. I tried to brush it off, told myself he was just some strange hiker passing through. Maybe he hadn't meant to scare me. Maybe he was just curious. But I couldn't shake the feeling that he'd been watching me for a lot longer than I'd realized. That night, I didn't sleep well. I kept the flashlight on and listened for any sound, any rustle or snap of a twig. I decided to leave first thing in the morning, to cut my trip short and get out of there. But the next day, things were quiet. No sign of the man, no more rearranged items. I started to think maybe I'd imagined it, maybe it was all just some kind of weird fluke. But that night, I woke up again to find my tent open. Wider this time, the cool night air slipping inside. I scrambled to sit up, and the first thing I saw was a new arrangement of my stuff, laid out in even lines: my jacket, my food bag, my flashlight, everything lined up, neat and careful, like someone was making sure I'd notice. And just outside my tent, barely visible in the faint light, was another note. It was a scrap of paper, a piece torn from what looked like an old map, and written on it in careful block letters was a single word: tomorrow. I froze, staring at the note, my heart pounding. There was no question now. Someone was out there, someone who'd been watching me this whole time, waiting for something. That note felt like a warning, or a promise. Either way, it was enough for me. I didn't waste any time. I threw everything into my bag, barely stopping to make sure I had everything. I didn't even take down the tent. I just grabbed my essentials and left. I didn't care if I had to walk all night, I just needed to get away from that place, to put as much distance between myself and that man as possible. As I walked, every sound felt amplified, every rustle in the trees sending a jolt of fear through me. I kept looking back, half expecting to see him following, but the trail was empty. Still, I felt him out there, watching, that approving smile seared into my mind. It took me most of the night, but I finally made it back to a busier part of the park, close to the ranger station. I waited there until morning, not caring about the curious looks from the few other hikers who passed by. When I finally got back to my car, I felt like I could breathe again. I drove out of there as fast as I could, glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see that man's face staring back at me. I don't know what he wanted or why he did any of it. I went out to Glacier National Park by myself, something I'd done a few times before without any issues. It was usually peaceful, just me and the quiet. I picked a secluded spot to set up my tent, not too far from the river. There were a lot of other people around, which was fine by me. I went to solitude, no distractions, just me and the trail. I set everything up, got the fire going, and started to settle in. That evening, I was cooking up some food when I realized a few things were missing from my bag. At first, I thought I just misplaced them, small stuff like my spare socks and one of my scents. I looked around, checked pockets, my tent, the ground, but they weren't anywhere. I convinced myself I probably just left them at home or packed them somewhere strange, even though I knew I wouldn't normally do that. I went on with the night, trying to enjoy the sounds of the river and the trees, but it felt different. It was like the woods were too quiet. I hear a snap or a shuffle in the bushes, but every time I turned there was. Felt that primal fear settle deep in my gut, the kind that tells you without words that you're in real danger. The shadows stretched long over the forest floor, and each snapping twig or rustling leaf seemed magnified 100 times. Dan's footsteps behind me never broke pace, echoing in that maddening rhythm, just close enough to let me know he was still there, but distant enough to make it feel like a twisted game of cat and mouse. I tried to keep calm, scanning the ground, the trees, anything that could anchor me back to safety, but it all looked the same in the fading light. At one point, I caught a glimpse of a faint trail off to the left, just a slender path winding through some dense brush. I didn't think. I just bolted, pushing through the branches, their claws tearing at my clothes, my skin. But as soon as I broke away, his footsteps quickened, too, a steady, relentless rhythm, closing in. I didn't dare look back. I could feel his presence like a shadow, a malignant weight bearing down on me. I tore through the brush, gasping, the world narrowing to the pounding of my heart and the sound of my own frantic breath. Finally, I stumbled onto a clearing, empty, stark, almost surreal in the dim twilight. I paused, looking around, catching my breath, thinking maybe, just maybe, I'd lost him. But then he stepped into the clearing, slowly, his face cast in shadows, the white brim of his hat catching the last bit of light. He just stood there, as if savoring the silence between us, that awful, deafening silence where neither of us moved, both suspended in some nightmarish limbo. "You know," he finally said, voice soft but sharp as glass, "you should really pay attention to where you're going. Out here, people disappear." I swallowed, trying to steady my voice. "I'll find my way back," I said, forcing the words out, hoping they didn't sound as hollow to him as they did to me. He just smiled, a slow, humorless twist of his lips. "Well, if you think you can make it alone, go on." He stepped aside, just a bit, his gaze following me like a predator eyeing prey, letting me pass. But as I moved past him, every nerve on edge, I heard him mutter, almost too low to catch, "You'll be back." They always come back. I didn't stop to ask what he meant. I just kept moving, faster and faster, until I found a path, real or imagined, and followed it without looking back. Hours later, when I finally stumbled out of the forest onto a paved road, the sky was dark, stars scattered. I never saw Dan again, but his voice still echoes in my mind, that promise hanging heavy in the night air, "They always come back." I got in my car, my hands still shaking, and drove. I didn't stop, not until I saw the city lights on the horizon, some semblance of safety in their glow. I haven't been hiking alone since that day, and even now, the thought of that forest fills me with a dread I can't quite shake. It's irrational, maybe, but there's a part of me that believes he's still out there, waiting, that he knows something about those woods that I'll never understand, and that he's not alone. Finally saw an opening through the trees. I walked faster, hoping it would. These stories are wonderfully eerie, each one crafted to evoke that creeping unease of being watched or followed, especially in the isolated wilderness. The slow, measured build of tension through pacing, auditory cues, and shadowy figures hidden just out of sight transform simple moments in nature into chilling encounters. The stories here lean into primal fears, being alone, vulnerable, and hunted by a presence that seems to understand our steps better than we do. They play on psychological tension rather than outright horror, restrained descriptions that leave much to the imagination, making the unknown antagonist all the more sinister. Each narrator's experience resonates as a unique, personal account, yet they share a haunting consistency. An ordinary hike turned into a quiet, terrifying pursuit. The antagonists, whether human or supernatural, embody an unsettling patience, a deliberate rhythm that's almost worse than an immediate threat. This pacing mirrors real-life anxieties, where the mind races against shadows in the periphery, seeking solace in daylight but forever haunted by the possibility that something might still be lurking. Would you like me to expand on any one of these stories or possibly blend elements to create a unique narrative twist? Winding through dense woods and offering stunning views of the coast, I love the quiet, the sound of. He just shrugged, almost as if the answer didn't really matter to him. Couldn't say. But he wasn't around for long. Left when he saw me watching. The man's eyes were on me now, unreadable and unsettling, as if he were sizing me up, looking for something. He took a few slow steps forward, hands stuffed into the pockets of his worn jacket, his gaze drifting over the symbols around my tent. When I reached the lake, I spun around, breathless, gripping my paddle so tight my knuckles were white. The water behind me lay still, undisturbed. There was no one else in sight. Just the swamp, stretching back into shadow and silence, as if I'd imagined the whole thing. But in the stillness, I could still feel it, that strange presence, lingering, like it was waiting for me to come back. My phone had no service and I didn't want to stop long enough to try finding a signal. The sun was starting to sink low. I knew I didn't have much time before the light started to go. I paddled faster, my arms burning. I started around for any sign of an exit. I was hoping I'd come across a ranger or another kayaker, but there was nothing, just the quiet and that steady creeping sense of being followed. I came around a bend and there in the middle of the water was another kayaker whose face in my head still I could make out their face. They were wearing a white VR hat full. Down low past me, the shadow of their paddle lay across their lap and they just sat there waiting. I set my own paddle hard, hammering in my chest, wondering if they were going to say something, explain why they'd been trailing me, but they didn't move, didn't say a word, just kept their face down, hidden. Then without a sound they lifted their paddle and turned, slowly gliding back into the thick trees and shadows. It was like they wanted me to follow. Then like they were leading me somewhere, but I stayed put, watching until their kayak disappeared around the bend. The water slid behind them. I waited a few seconds before turning my own kayak and paddling in the opposite direction faster than I ever thought I could. I didn't care if I was going the right way or not. I just wanted to get out, back to somewhere safe. People, the sound of paddling came back again, but this time it was moving away from me. I kept going, pushing hard until finally I saw the trailhead up ahead. I'd never felt such a mix of relief and terror at the same time. When I pulled up to the shore, I looked back one last time. The water was calm, no sign of anyone, like they'd never been there at all. I dragged my kayak onto land, barely stopping to catch my breath before making my way back to the car. As I loaded up, I kept scanning the trees, half expecting to see that figure standing somewhere watching, but there was nothing, just the empty trail behind me and the long empty stretch of road. Out of the park. Went out to Kenyon's National Park to get away for a few days. No work, no phone calls, just me and the canyon. I was doing a solo backpacking trip, camping out each night along a pretty rugged trail that weaved through deep canyons and dry riverbeds. I planned the route carefully, mapped out a few sites where I'd set up camp each night. The solitude out there was perfect, just me in the open desert. The first night everything went as planned. I made camp just as the sun was going down, cooked up some instant food over my little stove and watched the stars come out. You don't see stars like that in the city. It's just you and the whole sky stretching out forever. The quiet was almost heavy out there, like I was the last person on earth. I slept soundly without a single worry. It was the next day, mid-afternoon, when things started to feel off. I had just reached my second campsite, a small area by a dry riverbed under a large rock overhang. I set down my pack, went to clear a spot for my tent, and noticed something lying on the ground. It was a small piece of paper folded in half and tucked under a rock. My first thought was that someone had left a trail note or directions, which sometimes happens on popular trails, but this area wasn't exactly popular. I was supposed to be miles from anyone. I unfolded it, expecting maybe a list of places to visit or warnings about wildlife, but instead it just had 3 words written on it in thin blocky handwriting: nice blue pack. I had a blue backpack. I looked around, feeling a strange prickle run down my neck. No one was supposed to be out here. I even double-checked the registration before I left. There hadn't been another permit for this trail in days, but still I figured someone might have been here earlier, left a note as a joke, and moved on, trying to shrug it off. I crumpled up the note and tossed it aside. It wasn't enough to spook me, not yet. That night I was lying in my tent listening to the wind whistle through the canyon. I felt a little restless, like I was listening for something without knowing what it was. Around midnight I thought I heard faint footsteps, the soft crunch of rock shifting, but when I unzipped the tent and looked outside there was nothing there, just shadows stretching out under the moon. The next day I moved on. I told myself it was all on my head, probably just the emptiness out there messing with me, the wind maybe, or some animal passing by. I set out early, determined to put it out of my mind and just enjoy the trip, but halfway through the day as I rounded a sharp bend in the canyon I saw it again, another folded piece of paper held down by a stone. I picked it up with this sinking feeling like my stomach dropped. I didn't want to read it, but I did. Did you sleep well? My hands went cold. I stood there looking around, waiting for some kind of explanation to just appear in front of me, but it was all just rock and sky. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was left for someone else, maybe I was reading too much into it, but there was no mistaking it now. Someone was following me and they knew where I was staying each night. I stuffed the note in my pocket, feeling exposed out there in the open. My next campsite was still a few miles away, but I kept moving, kept checking over my shoulder every few minutes. Each time it was just me, the empty trail, and the sun beating down. When I finally got to my next stop, I set up my tent in a narrow alcove, hoping it'd keep me out of sight. I checked the crowd around the area, moving rocks and looking under shrubs, searching for anything that might have been left behind. For the first time since I started the trip I felt like I couldn't relax. I kept hearing things, small rustling noises, like someone was nearby. That night I barely slept. I lay awake, every small sound making my heart pound. By morning I felt like a wreck. I packed up quickly and decided to cut my trip short. I didn't care about the rest of the trail, I just wanted out. I followed the path back, pushing through miles as fast as I could. By the time I reached what was supposed to be my first campsite, again the sun was sinking low, casting deep shadows through the canyon, and that's when I saw it. Another note placed right where I had planned to set up camp. Again, this one wasn't hidden, it was right in the open waiting for me. I stared at it, feeling my hand shake as I reached down and unfolded it. Running won't help, my throat went dry. I scanned the cliffs above, looking for any sign of movement, any shape of dancing rock, but there was nothing, just silence stretching out around me, pressing down on me like a weight. I had this awful creeping feeling that someone was nearby, close enough to watch me read that note, but far enough to stay hidden. I didn't stay. I cracked my pack and pushed forward, not tearing at. The sun was almost gone. I figured I could make it back to my car by midnight if I kept going. Every few steps I glanced back, expecting to see someone on my trail, but it was always empty. The wind picked up, hauling through the canyon, and every now and then I thought I heard footsteps echoing behind me, faint and distant. I finally reached the end of the trail just past midnight. My car was the only one in the parking lot, and the sight of it felt like the biggest relief I'd ever felt in my life. I practically ran to it, threw my gear in and locked the doors, heart pounding. As I sat there catching my breath, I realized there was one last note tube under my windshield wiper. I stared at it, too scared to reach out and take it. I almost drove away without reading it, but something made me roll down the window and pull it out. In the same thin handwriting it said, "See you next time." I tore out of that lot and didn't look back. I don't know who was out there, how they were tracking me, or why they left those notes, but I haven't been back to Kenya since, and I don't plan to go back alone ever again. I signed up for a tour of Mammoth Cave. I've been to some small caves before, but Mammoth is something else entirely. It's huge. You walk for miles underground, twisting through dark corridors with walls so tall that sometimes they're hard to even see. I heard stories about how people could get turned around down there, how you could feel lost with even one wrong turn, but I figured with the guide tour there was no way that had happened. They do this all the time, right? I trusted that I'd be fine. The tour group I was with had maybe 20 people in it, plus our guide who kept a flashlight trained ahead of us as he led us down into the caverns. He'd stop every now and then to explain a feature like a limestone from formation or some old carving in the rock, and I tried to keep up, but I kept getting a little behind, stopping to look at things on my own. I didn't think much of it. I figured I'd catch up or someone would notice if I strayed too far. There was one part with the path split in two directions, one side going up and the other down. Our guide pointed up, saying that was where we were going next, so everyone else started up the incline. I'd liked a little again, but I was just about to follow. I noticed a narrow corridor to the side, just barely visible. Under the light it wasn't part of the main path. It was almost hidden behind a large boulder, like it didn't want to be found. I don't know what possessed me, but I felt drawn to it. I don't know why I even thought it was worth exploring, but I took a few steps in just to see. The rock walls were damp and I could feel a chill creeping in. The farther I went I could barely see anything, just a sliver of light from where I come in, so after a few steps I turned back, planning to rejoin the group. That's when I noticed the group was gone. Gone, no footsteps, no sounds, nothing. I hurried back, but there was no one at the top of the incline, just me in the silence and the dark stretching out in all directions. I tried to stay calm, but I felt this creeping panic in my chest. I told myself to follow the main path and I'd run into them soon enough. It was maybe 5 minutes later when I came to a dead end that made no sense because I was sure I hadn't taken any turns, just followed a straight line. The darkness behind me felt thicker now. As I turned around, shining my flashlight back toward the way I'd come, but there was nothing, just smooth rock, no sign of a path or opening. I could barely breathe as I tried to feel my way back, hands tracing along the damp walls, but it was like I was walking in circles. I started to feel dizzy, the air so thick and heavy pressing down on me. Every few steps I stopped calling out, trying to hear any echo or voices, but all I got was silence. I didn't know how long I spent wandering where I couldn't even tell what direction I was facing anymore. The light from my flashlight flickered when I tried to change its batteries. It cut out, leaving me in darkness. I screamed for help, for someone, anyone, hoping they would hear me, but all I got was silence echoing back like a warning. I stumbled on, blindly feeling for something, anything, but I couldn't even feel the ground under my feet anymore. It was like the rock was swallowing me whole. It was only when I heard it that I froze. The softest sound, like a whisper, someone speaking my name, but there was no one there, no guide, no tour group. It was just me alone in the dark. I stood still, trying to control my breathing, straining to listen, but all I heard was my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. Finally I found the small crevice I had come through, my fingers trembling as I squeezed through the gap back into the main passageway. Gasping for air, I turned around, expecting to see something waiting for me, but it was still empty, just the dull echo of my own breaths. I found my way back to the group finally. They were just finishing up their tour, completely oblivious to my absence. The guide looked surprised when I returned. He asked where I had gone, as if it was totally normal for me to have disappeared down there for so long. I didn't say anything, just sat in a daze, thinking how close I'd come to being completely lost. I haven't gone back to Mammoth since either. It felt too risky, and I can't shake the feeling that whatever was down there in the dark is still waiting. Last summer I rented a cabin near the coast. It was supposed to be a relaxing getaway, but it turned into something else entirely. I got there late in the evening, the sky fading into darkness. As I drove along the winding roads, I was ready for some peace and quiet, just me and the sound of the waves crashing on the shore. The cabin was small but cozy. There were a few other cabins scattered around, but it felt isolated enough. I unpacked and settled in, and as the night grew dark I found myself drawn to the window looking out over the water. The moonlight made it shimmer like silver. I sat there listening to the soft rush of the waves, and that's when I saw it, a flicker of light far out on the water. At first I thought it was just a boat, but it was moving strangely, like it was drifting with the waves. It flickered again, then disappeared into the darkness. I shook my head, thinking I was imagining things, and turned back to my book, but it was hard to concentrate. Something kept nagging at me, so I looked out again. This time it was back, glowing brightly like a lantern floating above the waves. It was there one moment and gone the next. I couldn't shake the feeling that it was watching me, like it was waiting for something. It felt like I was caught in a dream. I got up and grabbed a flashlight to see if I could spot anything closer to shore, but by the time I went back to the window the light was gone. I tried to put it out of my mind, heading to bed, but sleep wouldn't come. Every creak and groan of the cabin made me jump. I kept thinking about that light and what it could have been. Finally I got up and went outside. The air was thick and humid. The sound of the waves crashing against the rocks was a soothing rhythm, but I felt uneasy, like I was being watched. I walked along the shore, shining my flashlight into the darkness, but there was nothing, just the endless stretch of water before me. Then I saw it again, the light flickering out in the distance. It was almost like a dance, weaving in and out of sight. I was drawn to it. I had to know what it was. So I started walking toward the water, but as I got closer it seemed to drift further away. I called out, thinking maybe someone was out there, but there was no answer, just the sound of the waves crashing around me. I was soaked in sweat now. The cold water lapping at my feet felt shocking and refreshing. I stumbled back toward the cabin. I don't know how long I stood there trying to make sense of what I was seeing, but it was too late. The moon had disappeared behind the clouds and the light had gone out too, leaving me in the pitch black. I was terrified and turned back to the cabin, but something stopped me. Right there on the beach in front of me was a figure silhouetted against the dark sea. They were standing still. I couldn't make out any details, just the outline of someone staring out at the water. I opened my mouth to call out to them, but no sound came out. My heart raced as I took a step back, trying to figure out if I was dreaming or awake, but then they turned, and for the briefest moment the moon peeked through the Clouds illuminating their face. I didn't recognize them. Their eyes were wide open and unblinking, fixed on me in a way that sent chills racing down my spine. Without thinking, I turned and ran back toward the cabin. Every step felt like an eternity. I was shaking and gasping for breath. When I finally made it inside, I locked the door behind me and sat in the dark staring out the window. I didn't dare move the whole night. I kept hearing sounds outside, whispers, the sound of someone walking around. I don't think I slept at all, just waited in the darkness until the dawn light finally broke over the horizon, and when I looked out there was nothing, no one on the beach, just the waves rolling in and out. But I packed my things and left as quickly as I could. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been watching me that night. Whatever that light was, it wasn't just a trick of the moonlight or some boat in the distance. It was something else, something that should have stayed buried in the depths of the ocean, and ever since, I haven't been back near the water. It's staying close to the warmth. I kept glancing back toward the edge of the light, but the hiker was gone. The group was friendly and they offered me food and water. I told them a little about my trip, but I left out the part about the man. I didn't want to alarm anyone. As night fell and the stars came out, I sat with the group, feeling safe, surrounded by others. Eventually I excused myself to set up my tent nearby. I could still hear the laughter and chatter from the fire, but I felt the weight of the day wash over me as I lay down. Exhaustion took over and sleep came easily. The next morning I packed up quickly, eager to leave the campsite. I needed to feel secure, surrounded by other hikers. I left no trace behind, hoping to forget the incident, but the memory of that man lingered in my mind. Denali had offered so much beauty, but it also reminded me to be careful. I learned that some encounters could change your perception of the world around you. I continued my hike, feeling a little stronger, but always looking over my shoulder. I never saw the man again, and I hoped I never would. I had looked forward to this camping trip for months. Crater Lake National Park had always been a dream destination of mine. The deep blue water surrounded by cliffs and trees was something I had wanted to see in person. I had planned everything carefully: the route, the supplies, and the campsite. I made sure to pack all my gear, food, and enough water for my stay. I arrived at the park in the late afternoon. The sun was still high in the sky, and I could feel warmth on my skin. I found a good spot near the lake, away from the other campers, so I could enjoy the solitude. I set up my tent, organized my things, and took a moment to admire the view. The lake was breathtaking. It looked like something out of a postcard. As evening fell, I lit a fire, cooked a simple meal, and settled in to enjoy the peace. The sounds of nature surrounded me: the rustling leaves, bird calls, and the soft lapping of water against the shore. I felt content, grateful for this moment of escape. That night I slept soundly. The stars were bright above and the air was cool. I woke up in the early hours needing to use the restroom. I stepped out of my tent, wrapped in my jacket, and walked over to the nearby bathroom facilities. I made my way back to my campsite. The moonlight illuminated in the path. When I returned, I noticed something was off. My car, which had been parked neatly in its spot, looked different. I could see that it had been moved. I was certain I had parked it straight, but now it was angled as if someone had pushed it slightly. My heart began to race. I looked around, hoping to see other campers nearby, but there was only silence. I approached my car to check it. The ground was soft and I noticed fresh tire tracks in the dirt. It seemed clear that someone had indeed pushed it. I looked around for any sign of another person, but the area was deserted. I felt a chill run down my spine. I had seen other campers earlier, but now the place felt empty. I checked my belongings to make sure everything was in its place. My heart sank as I noticed my backpack was not where I had left it. Panic surged through me. Had someone taken it? I had left my phone and wallet inside. I searched around my campsite frantically, calling out softly, hoping someone would answer. The night was quiet. I felt isolated, vulnerable. The trees stood tall around me, their shadows creeping in the dim light. I decided I needed to get my things and leave. I was not about to spend another night feeling this way. I reached my car and got in. I locked the doors, looking around, feeling eyes on. Even if there was no one there, I turned the engine on and slowly began to drive, keeping my eyes peeled for anything unusual. The road was winding and dark, but I needed to get to the park entrance. As I drove, I saw something move in my rearview mirror, a shadow. I looked back, but there was nothing, just the darkness of the forest pressing close. My palms were sweaty on the steering wheel. I glanced back at the mirror again. This time I thought I saw headlights behind me, but they disappeared. Just as quickly I tried to convince myself that it was just my imagination, but anxiety clawed at my mind. We drove faster. The road was steep and turning. Every bump and rustle made me jump. The quiet of the night felt heavy, filled with tension. I kept expecting to see someone standing by the roadside or in the trees. When I finally reached the entrance of the park, my heart sank in relief. As I approached the gate, I saw a ranger standing there talking to another driver. I pulled over and rolled down my Window, excuse me, I said, my voice shaky. I think someone has been messing with my car at the campground. The ranger turned to me, his expression serious. What do you mean? I was answered by Crater Lake. When I got up this morning, my car had been moved. There were tire tracks like someone pushed it. Are you sure you parked it like that? He asked, but I could see the concern in his eyes. Yes, I insisted. I know I parked it straight and my backpack is missing. I don't know what to do. The ranger nodded, his expression firm. You did the right thing by coming here. It is best if you don't go back to that area. We have had reports of people camping out there after hours and it can be dangerous. I swallowed hard, feeling the weight of his words. What should I do then? Drive to the nearest town. We will send someone out to check on your campsite. Make sure you report anything else that seems odd. I nodded, feeling grateful for his help. As I turned to leave, I caught a glimpse of the other driver looking at me, a shadow passing over their face. They seemed too interested in our conversation and it made me uneasy. I drove away quickly, feeling the weight of what had happened hang over me. I drove to the nearest town, my heart still racing. The road felt longer than it should. I replayed the events in my mind, trying to make sense of what happened. It was supposed to be a peaceful trip, but instead I felt exposed and afraid. I finally reached a small diner and parked my car, feeling a rush of relief to be in a place with people around. As I stepped inside, the bell jingled, and I looked around at the few customers scattered in booths. I approached the counter and ordered a coffee. I just needed to collect myself. While I waited, I glanced out the window. A figure passed by outside, someone in a dark jacket moving quickly. I felt my stomach drop as they turned and looked straight at me. My breath caught in my throat. It was him, the man from the campground. I ducked down, hoping he hadn't seen me. I listened to the sounds of the diner, the clatter of dishes, the low hum of conversation. I dared a quick glance again, but he was gone. My heart raced. I needed to call the ranger again, but I was scared to be alone. The coffee came and I took a sip, my hand shaking. I tried to focus on the taste, but it did little to calm my nerves. I could not shake the feeling of being watched. I needed to get out of there, find a safe place. After finishing my drink, I paid the bill and left the diner, my heart pounding with every step. I hurried back to my car, looking over my shoulder. I quickly got in and locked the doors. I had to get away. The thought of being alone in that campsite haunted me. As I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror one last time, half expecting to see him again. The road stretched ahead and I promised myself I would never return to that place. Crater Lake was beautiful, but that beauty was now tainted by fear. I kept driving, focusing on getting to safety where I could finally breathe again. I had been looking forward to my trip to North Cascades National Park for weeks. I needed to get away from the noise of the city to find some peace by the water. The park was known for its stunning scenery and I had heard the fishing was excellent. I arrived early in the morning, the air crisp and fresh, the sun just peeking over the mountains. I parked my car near the river and made my way down the path toward my chosen fishing spot, eager to cast my line into the water. It was quiet there. The only sounds were the gentle lapping of the water and the occasional call of a bird. I settled in, casting my line and letting my thoughts drift. Fishing always had a calming effect on me. I felt relaxed and at ease, just me and the river. After a while I noticed movement further down the bank. A man appeared walking toward me. He looked to be in his 40s with a scruffy beard and a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. I felt a twinge of unease as he approached, but I tried to dismiss it. Maybe he was just another fisherman looking for a spot. Mind if I join you? He asked, not waiting for an answer. Before I could respond, he set his gear down a few feet away from me and started setting up his rod. I smiled politely, thinking it was a bit strange, but I figured I could share the space. After all, it was a big river. Sure, the more the merrier, I said, trying to keep it light. He smiled back, but it didn't reach his eyes as he began to fish. He started making small talk. Nice day for it, the perfect weather, he said, glancing up at the sky. I nodded in agreement, hoping he would focus on his fishing. He cast his line and then turned to me, his gaze steady. So you come out here often? Not really, this is my first time here, I replied, trying to keep the conversation short. Oh really, what brings you to North Cascades? He leaned in slightly, his interest seeming genuine but feeling a bit too intense. Just needed a break from work, I said, keeping it vague. Thought I'd do some fishing, enjoy nature. Oh, it must be stressful, he said. He paused for a moment, looking at me as if he were waiting for me to say more. I shifted uncomfortably. Yet it can be, I replied, feeling my patience start to wane. He smiled again, and it was just as unsettling as before. You ever catch anything big? Not today, I replied, trying to redirect the conversation back to the fishing. I could feel my skin prickling. The man's smile faltered and he seemed to contemplate his next words. You know, fishing is a lot like life. You sit here and wait for the right moment, but sometimes you don't know what's coming yet. I suppose so, I said, trying to stay polite. While my paradise, the vastness of the night sky and the rugged mountains were Mesmerizing. I planned a night hike wanting to experience the park under the stars. The sun set slowly and I started my hike. Just as twilight settled in, I had a flashlight strapped to my waist and a beam of light flickered against the trees, illuminating my path. As I walked, the sounds of the night surrounded me, the rustling of leaves, the distant chirping of crickets, and the occasional call of an owl. It felt peaceful, almost magical, but something in the air felt heavy, as if the night was holding its breath. After hiking for about an hour, I reached a clearing with a view of the stars. I stopped to take it all in, the vastness of the universe stretching above me. I pulled out my phone to take a picture when I noticed a movement on one of the nearby rock outcroppings. At first I thought it was just my imagination, but there it was again, a figure waving at me. I squinted into the darkness, trying to see more clearly. The figure was standing on the rock, silhouetted against the night sky. They raised their arm again, a slow and deliberate wave, as if they were beckoning me over. My heart raced with excitement and curiosity. I had heard that it was common for hikers to encounter other people out in the wilderness, especially on popular trails like this one. I assumed this person might have a similar interest in the stars, or was simply enjoying the solitude of the night. Hello, I called out, raising my hand in response. Is everything okay? The figure continued to wave, but I noticed something odd. They were not moving from that spot. No steps were taken toward me. The way they waved felt almost mechanical, like they were waiting for me to approach. A chill ran down my spine. Despite the unease creeping in, I felt compelled to investigate. I started walking towards the outcropping, terrified. With each step, the ground was rocky and uneven, and I felt a mix of excitement and dread. As I got closer, I called out again, "Hey, are you alright?" The figure was now barely visible. The moment I stepped onto the outcropping, I realized there was no one there. I stood frozen, scanning the area for any sign of movement. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, the thrill of the unknown turning into something darker. The air felt thicker and I felt like I was being watched. Then I noticed the ground beneath me. The dirt was freshly disturbed, as if someone had been standing right there. Just moments before, there were footprints leading away from the rock, but they were erratic and scattered, like whoever had been there had moved quickly, and in a panic my breath quickened as I crouched down to examine the area more closely. The footprints were not from hikers' boots. They were bare and left a clear imprint in the soil, leading deeper into the darkness. I glanced back at the path I had come from. It felt like a lifetime away, and the way back suddenly seemed daunting. I had always felt comfortable in nature, but now it felt like a trap. A cold wind swept through the trees, sending a shiver down my spine. I stood up, a deep sense of fear washing over me. I had to leave. I turned around, planning to retrace my steps, but I hesitated. I could not shake the feeling that I was not alone. I quickly made my way back to the trail, glancing over my shoulder. The darkness felt alive, as if it were watching me. I moved faster, adrenaline pushing me forward, and I tried to rationalize what I had seen. Maybe it was just someone playing a prank, or perhaps a hiker who had lost their way, but something deep inside me knew that this was different. The shadows around me felt longer, darker. I picked up my pace, my breathing coming in sharp bursts as I hurried down the trail. Every rustle of the leaves and snap of the twig made me jump. The more I hurried, the more the fear grew. I wanted to believe I was just overreacting, but it felt too real. When I finally reached my car, I fumbled with the keys, my hand shaking. I glanced around, expecting to see someone lurking in the shadows, but the area was quiet. I threw my gear in the back seat and locked the doors. As soon as I was inside, I sat there for a moment, heart racing, trying to calm myself up. Looked back at the trail, the darkness swallowing it up, and I felt a sense of relief wash over me as I drove away. I could not shake the feeling that I had escaped something sinister. I tried to tell myself it was just my imagination, but I knew what I had seen. A figure waving, the disturbed dirt and the footprints leading into the night haunted me. As I left the park, I would never forget the feeling of being watched, the quiet tension of the night, and the strange, unsettling encounter that pushed me to the edge. Crater Basin National Park was meant to be a refuge, a place of beauty, but it turned into a nightmare I would carry with me long after I left. I promised myself I would never hike alone at night again, knowing that the wilderness can hold more than just nature. It can hold secrets that are best left undisturbed. I have always loved camping, especially alone. There is something freeing about being out in the wilderness, away from all the noise and distractions of everyday life. I decided to spend a weekend at Big Bend National Park, a place known for its beauty and solitude. I had my tent set up, and the vastness of the stars above was stunning. The peace of the night surrounded me as I settled in with a book, the flickering light of my lantern casting shadows around the campsite. As the hours passed, I started to hear sounds in the distance. At first it was just a rustling of leaves, the sounds of the night. Then I heard laughter. It was faint but unmistakable, and it made me sit up in my sleeping bag. I listened Closely trying to determine where it was coming from, the laughter grew louder, mixed with voices, and it seemed to be coming from a nearby area and not formed in my stomach, and I felt a strange mix of curiosity and caution. It was late, but I felt compelled to investigate. I grabbed my flashlight, trying to push away the unease creeping in. I had been told that this park was safe, that the people who ventured here were usually friendly. I slipped out of my tent and walked towards the sounds, the beam of my flashlight cutting through the dark. The laughter guided me to a clearing not far from my tent. There I found a group of people gathered around a bonfire, the flames dancing high and casting a warm glow on their faces. They were laughing and talking, in their voices ringing out in the stillness of the night. I felt a bit relieved but also on edge. I was not expecting to find others this far out. As I approached, they noticed me and turned their heads. Their smiles were wide and they waved me over. "Hey there, come join us," one of them called out. I felt a mixture of warmth and weariness. They seemed inviting, but something about the way they looked at me made me hesitate. I stepped closer, trying to read the situation. The group was a mix of men and women, all looking to be in their 20s or 30s. They wore casual clothes and their laughter seemed genuine. I was almost ready to sit down when I noticed how their eyes kept drifting towards my backpack. It was resting against a nearby rock, my only source of food and water for the night. "Nice backpack back you got there," another person said, a grin stretching across his face. I forced a smile, trying to keep the mood light. "Thanks, just some supplies for the night," they nodded, but the way they kept glancing at it made my skin crawl. I tried to change the subject. "What brings you all out here?" "We come out here often," a woman replied, her voice cheerful, "just to get away from everything. You know, the stars are incredible here." "Yeah," I said, trying to sound enthusiastic. "I love the stars," but as I spoke I noticed their smiles didn't quite reach their eyes. It was as if they were playing a part and I was the audience. They invited me to sit by the fire and I felt compelled to join them despite my instincts telling me to leave. As I settled onto a log, the warmth of the flames enveloped me and I felt a bit more at ease, but that feeling quickly faded as they resumed their conversation. After ringing out with an edge I could not place, "Hey, you should show us what's in your backpack," one of the men suggested. Suddenly his tone was playful, but there was a seriousness behind it that made my heart race. I forced a laugh, feeling the tension rise in my chest. "Oh, it's just some food and a few supplies, nothing special. Come on, we're all friends here, let's see it," he pressed, leaning forward, his gaze intense. I glanced at the others and they all nodded, their eyes eager. A wave of unease washed over me. Something was off. This wasn't just friendly curiosity. "I really need to keep it safe," I said, my voice steady despite the fear building inside me. "It's important to me." The group exchanged glances and I could feel the mood shift, their previous warmth fading into something colder. "Important, huh?" another man said, his voice low. "What's so important that you can't share it with friends?" I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I forced myself to smile, but inside I was panicking. "Just some personal items, I promise, it's nothing interesting." The laughter stopped, the fire crackled and silence enveloped us. I could feel the weight of their stares. Assessing, waiting. I needed to leave. "I should really get back to my campsite," I said, standing up abruptly. The group shifted and the tension in the air became palpable. "Thank you for the invitation, but before I could finish, one of the women stood up as well. "Wait, don't go just yet. We were having such a nice time." Her smile was tight and it was. I turned, my heart pounding, and took a few steps back. "I really need to go," I said firmly, trying to keep my voice steady. Suddenly the man who had first spoken stepped closer. "Come on. Don't be rude, just share with us. We only want to have a good time." I could sense the shift in their demeanor, the way they surrounded me like wolves closing in on prey. I took another step back, feeling the fear rise inside me like a wave. "Please," I said, trying to keep my voice calm, "I just want to go back." They paused and for a moment it seemed like they were reconsidering. Then the woman said, "Why don't you just let us take a look? We can help you with whatever is in there." I turned and ran. The laughter from behind me turned into shouts as I bolted into the darkness. I didn't look back, my heart pounding in my chest. I felt a fear. I felt a flicker of unease but tried to brush it off. Maybe she was just enjoying the same trail. I continued walking, but I could not shake the feeling that I was being watched. It was an unsettling sensation, like someone had their eyes on me. I quickened my pace, hoping to create some distance. Each time I looked back I saw her, always there, always watching. It was like a shadow that refused to disappear. I decided to stop at a lookout point to take a break. The view was breathtaking and I thought maybe some time alone would help me relax. I sat on a rock, pulled out my water bottle and took a long drink. I listened to the sounds of nature around me, the rustling leaves, the distant chirping of birds. For a moment I felt at peace. That peace shattered when I heard footsteps approaching. I turned to see the woman in the red jacket standing a few feet away from me. She smiled, but there was something off about it. "Hi there," She said, I've been following you for a bit. Hi, I replied, trying to keep my tone casual. I didn't realize anyone was behind me. I just wanted to make sure you were okay, she said, taking a step closer. You know, hiking alone can be dangerous. I appreciate that, I said, feeling a knot form in my stomach, but I've hiked here before. Her smile widened, but it felt forced. Still, it is always good to have someone watching out for you. I nodded, unsure of how to respond. Thanks, I guess. Do you come here often, she asked, her eyes scanning my face like she was looking for something. Not really, this is my first time at this park, I said, feeling more uncomfortable by the second. She took another step forward, closing the distance. Oh, so you are from out of town. Where are you staying? Just in town for a few days, I said, trying to keep my answer short. I have a hotel room. What hotel? She pressed, her tone shifting slightly. I would rather not say, I said, my heart racing. I felt like I was being cornered, like she was digging for information I was not willing to give. Come on, I just want to know more about you. I can help you if you are new here. There are some great places to explore. Her voice was sweet, but it held an edge. I felt like she was probing, trying to find a way in. I'm fine on my own, really, I said, forcing a smile. She looked disappointed, but she did not give up. What do you do for a living? Just a job, I said. I had no interest in sharing anything more. Just a job, she laughed, and it felt too loud in the stillness of the canyon. Everyone has dreams, you know, or yours. I could feel her eyes on me, searching, and I started to feel trapped. I glanced around, hoping someone else would come along. I think I should get going, I said, standing up. Why don't you stay a little longer? You have no idea how beautiful it is here, she said, her voice dropping to a softer tone. You can't rush these things. I really should go, I said, stepping back. Why are you so afraid? She asked, suddenly her expression changing. I just want to help you. You need to let me. In her words made my skin crawl. I turned and started walking away, trying to stay calm. Where are you going? She called after me, her voice sharp. Now you can't just leave. I picked up my pace, fear flooding through me. I could hear her footsteps behind me, the sound growing closer. I'm not following you, I shouted, trying to put distance between us. Why are you running? She told. I'm just trying to help. I didn't look back. I could feel her gaining on me, the air feeling thick and heavy. I thought about my phone, about calling for help, but my mind was racing. I just needed to get away from her. I turned the corner on the trail, praying for a break in the trees or any sign of other hikers. Suddenly I saw two people up ahead walking towards me. I felt a surge of hope. Hey, I shouted, waving my arms. Help! The woman in the red jacket stopped in her tracks, her face contorting in anger. I sprinted toward the couple, shouting, come closer, what is happening? One of them asked, who are you confused? She's following me, I tried, pointing back at the woman. The couple turned and the woman in the red jacket took a step back. I was just trying to help her, she exclaimed, but her voice lacked conviction. Stay back, I shouted, feeling a wave of adrenaline. The couple moved closer to me, forming a barrier. Are you okay? One of them asked. Not really, she won't leave me alone, I said, my heart racing. The woman in the red jacket narrowed her eyes, her expression shifting from faint friendliness to something darker. You don't need them, you need to trust me, she said, her voice low. Get away from her, one of the hikers shouted. The woman stepped back, but I could see the anger in her eyes. You will regret this, she said, and then she turned and walked away, disappearing back down the trail. I took a shaky breath, my body trembling. Thank you, I said to the couple who were now standing close. I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't come along. Just stay with us for a bit, one of them said. We will walk you back to the trailhead. I nodded, grateful for their presence. The hike back felt longer than the way in, but I felt safer knowing they were beside me. I kept glancing back, half expecting to see the woman following us again, but there was no sign of her. When we finally reached the parking area, I could see my car and felt a rush of relief. I thanked the couple again before quickly getting in and locking the doors. I drove away, my heart still pounding. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the road. As I left the park, I thought about how quickly things had turned, how a simple hike had become a terrifying experience. I promised myself I would never hike alone again. The wilderness could be beautiful, but it could also hold darkness, and I would be more careful in the future. The summer of last year, I went on a solo trip to Katmai National Park. I had always wanted to fish in the wild where the rivers ran clear and the fish were plenty. I found a nice spot by the Neck River, a place where I could cast my line and enjoy the tranquility of nature. The sun was shining, the air was fresh, and I felt at peace as I set up my gear. I settled in, casting my line into the water. The sound of the river flowing was soothing, and I could hear birds chirping in the trees. I was lost in my thoughts, enjoying the solitude. It was just me, my fishing pole, and the beautiful scenery. After a while I caught my first fish. It was small. I felt a rush of excitement as I continued to fish. I noticed another angler nearby. He was on the opposite bank, standing in the water with a long fishing rod. At first I did not think much of it. I could see he was focused, reeling in one fish after another with surprising speed. It was impressive, but something about the way he was fishing caught my eye. He seemed to be using strange techniques, moving his rod in a way that felt unnatural. Curiosity got the better of me and I decided to approach him. I waded across the shallow water trying to maintain a friendly demeanor. As I got closer I noticed his clothes were worn and dirty, as if he had been living in the wilderness for a while. His hair was long and tangled and he had a beard that was equally unkempt. "Hey there," I called out, trying to sound casual. "You're catching a lot of fish." He looked up at me, his expression blank. "Yes," he replied, his voice slow and gravelly. "They are biting today. Looks like you have a good technique," I said, attempting to keep the conversation light. "I'm still trying to figure this river out." He climbed, glared at me, then back at his line. "You have to know how to lure them," he said, almost as if he was not talking to me but to himself. "They are more willing to bite if you play with them." I felt a chill run down my spine. "Right, I suppose that makes sense," I replied, not sure what to say next. He continued to reel in fish after fish, hardly looking at me. "What brings you here?" he asked suddenly, his tone shifting slightly. "I just wanted to do some fishing. It's nice to get away from the city for a while," I said, trying to sound friendly. "City people don't understand," he said, a strange smile creeping onto his face. "They think fishing is just a sport. They don't know what it's really about." I felt my unease grow. "What do you mean?" He leaned in closer, lowering his voice. "You catch fish to survive, not for fun. There is more to it than just a catch. You have to respect them. You have to know their patterns." I nodded, trying to play along. "Sure, I guess I never thought about it that way." He turned back to his fishing and I felt the silence stretch uncomfortably between us. I started to feel trapped, as if I had walked into a conversation I should not have. "What do you do with the fish you catch?" I asked, hoping to steer the conversation in a different direction. He looked at me, his eyes narrowing. "I take what I need. It is about survival out here." I felt my stomach twist. "That makes sense. I plan to catch a few for dinner tonight," I said, trying to lighten the mood. "Dinner?" he echoed, almost like he was tasting the word. "What if you do not catch enough?" I hesitated. "I will manage," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. He leaned back, his expression unreadable. "Some people do not manage. They leave the wilderness with nothing. It can be dangerous if you do not know what you are doing." I took a step back, feeling the water lapping in my boots. "I think I'll be fine," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Fine," he said, but the way he said it sent a shiver through me. "Just remember, it is not just about the fish, it is about what you take from the land." I did not like the way he was looking at me, like he was seeing right through me. I decided it was time to go back to my spot. "Well, I'll let you get back to it," I said, forcing a smile. He nodded but did not take his eyes off me. "You can come back anytime," he said. "The fish will always be here, and so will I." I turned and quickly walked back to my side of the river, my heart racing. I tried to shake off the feeling of dread that settled in my chest. I cast my line again, but I found it hard to concentrate. The way he had looked at me, the things he had said echoed in my mind. After a while I started to pack up my gear, my hands trembling slightly. I wanted to get out of there.